Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma.
And I'm George.
George is our sports journalist. He's joining us today for a very special ep. George, welcome back.
Thanks, it's great to be on the pod.
Today we're talking about streaming services and their growing investment in sports broadcast and storytelling, which is shifting the way that audiences engage with sports. This week, Formula One confirmed a US car giant is joining the F1 grid in 2026. Now, it comes off the back of the global hit Netflix doco-series Drive to Survive. While we can't say for certain that the show is responsible for this deal, it's hard to ignore the success of Drive to Survive in bringing F1 to American audiences and raising the profile of the sport all around the world. Just the other week, a boxing match streamed on Netflix saw millions tune in around the world. The event even included the most watched professional women's sporting event in US history. I'm talking about the Katie Taylor-Amanda Serrano bout ahead of the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul match. But docu-series like The Last Dance, Simone Biles Rising, and, of course, Drive to Survive are all examples of Netflix's successful investment in sports stories. And who better to talk us through this topic than George, TDA sports journalist. George, let's talk about this F1 announcement first. What do we need to know about the GM Cadillac news?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, Formula One announced on Monday this week that it had reached an agreement in principle with General Motors, which is a massive American car company. They're one of the big three alongside Ford and Dodge. And they've reached an agreement in principle to support General Motors in bringing a team onto the F1 grid in 2026. So it's expanding from 10 teams to 11 teams.
So that's pretty significant because
it's massive.
We might see like the owner of a team or the brand name of a team change, but it's always 10 on the grid.
Yeah, it's been 10 since about 2017 when Haas joined, and they're also an American team. So you can see that even before Drive to Survive, Formula One was making a move towards the US and the massive American market.
And that's really expanded in the last few years, as we've seen. How much of that growth can be traced back to the TV show Drive to Survive? Tell me about that context.
Well, basically, before 2019, when the series first aired, Formula One was pretty much a European sport. A lot of the races were in Europe. A lot of the fans were in Europe.
A lot of the drivers were European.
Yeah, a lot of the drivers were European. So it was essentially a bunch of European stakeholders investing in and caring about a European sport. It's pretty much a global phenomenon now.
So I'm going to ask you to give us some numbers to contextualize how much of a phenomenon, but just anecdotally, I do feel like this is the point at the episode where I have to give my own disclaimer. I'm an absolute massive fiend for F1. I love Drive to Survive. I'm a huge fan of the sport, but I'm not someone who is conventionally interested in sports. I'm not a big fan of any other sport, really, but there is something about that series that really just drew me in, the storytelling. And I am just one example of, I'm sure, stacks of people around the world, millions of women even, who are now big fans of this sport. So tell me about the numbers.
Well, yeah, if we look at the numbers, you can see that Drive to Survive, it significantly changed the demographic of F1 fans. I think the most remarkable number is that the percentage of the audience that is women has jumped from 8% in 2017 to 40% in 2022.
Wow.
And it's not just the demographic of the audience, it's bringing a whole new audience to the sport itself. So the same survey in 2022 revealed that 34% of current F1 fans discovered the sport through the next Netflix series, that's wild.
It's huge numbers when you consider 1 in every 3 people in the stands potentially on a race weekend are there because of a Netflix show.
Absolutely.
So, George, it's obviously a staggering shift for the sport, but it's not the first time we've seen the kind of storytelling doco-style device used to engage audiences in sport. Tell me about this concept called the escalator effect.
Okay, well, I came across this concept in my research and I was looking a little bit into That's where I got these numbers from about Drive to Survive and stuff. And
he's a journalist.
I'm a journalist. So basically, the escalator effect is a strategy where the fans are introduced to a sport through compelling human storytelling. So you look at Drive to Survive, it didn't just show the fast cars racing around a nondescript track somewhere in Europe or in the US. It took us behind the scenes. It made the audience a fly on the wall, and it revealed the personalities, the conflicts, and the human drama behind the sport, which, as we know, as people who've watched the show, there is so much of, and there's so much to lift the lid on in F1.
Yeah, I think it's drawing people in to care about the people at the heart of the sport, and once you care about those individuals, you start to care more about the sport itself and the whole competition.
Yeah, exactly. So if we think about the way it's changed the profile of the sport, you think about people like Lewis Hamilton. He was one of the household names that he transcended the sport without Drive to Survive. He didn't need Drive to Survive.
Before I watched Drive to Survive, he's probably the only driver I could have named for you.
He's an incredibly marketable and successful driver, most importantly. He's won 7 world titles. So, but now we have drivers further down the grid, like a Pierre Gasly or even a Toto Wolff, a team principal, someone that people outside the sport, even fans of the sport, probably wouldn't know who they were intimately until the series, and they become mainstream celebrities with massive social media followings.
I think that example of the team principals is fascinating. If you had told me several years ago, that millions of people around the world would care about like the senior leadership of a brand, a sporting brand's body, its management, its senior engineers, I would have thought that was a hard sell. But you're saying that this show essentially humanizes these characters, and that's how it makes us care.
At the end of the day, they are just sport administrators. But I guess it's like Suits. It makes law really dramatic and really interesting.
Suits LA coming next year. So, I mean, we've spoken a lot about F1 here, George, but obviously we're using it as an example to talk about the broader concept of sports entertainment, changing audience behaviors and growing sports brands. Talk to me about the dollar value that Drive to Survive has influenced when it comes to F1's success. What can we learn from that to understand this concept more broadly? Yeah,
so it hasn't just grown the audience. It's obviously it's had a financial impact, and I think one of the key examples that shows us the growth of the sport is the broadcasting rights. So before Drive to Survive, ESPN, a US broadcaster's deal with Formula One, was about $5 million annually.
So ESPN would pay F1 $5 million a year for the right to show those races in the US.
And that is a number based on how many eyeballs are going to be glued to TV screens. And a whole nother story is ad revenue and all that sorts of stuff. But now that same deal is worth somewhere between $75 and $90 million, which is a massive jump.
So ESPN are now paying, I'm not quick at maths, but we've gone from 5 mil to 75 to 90 mil in a pretty quick window. I know also that attendance has skyrocketed. You've mentioned there are more races in the US. How have the boots on the ground numbers shifted come race weekends?
Yeah, so, in 2022, the US Grand Prix in Austin saw a record-breaking attendance of 440,000 fans. I mean, that's over 3 days, but 440,000 fans is a lot of people.
And that's a 40% increase from 2018.
Exactly.
So the numbers really do speak for themselves. I'm also thinking, while you're saying this, George, not that I'm not so engrossed in it, but I've got that song, that Max Verstappen Red Bull song in my head. You know, the one that's like, duh, 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 Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're talking about crossing cultural barriers here. So essentially we're saying Netflix has globalized what was once a European or a European-dominated sport and market. But it feels like this is really feeding into a bigger sports marketing strategy, which brings us to, more recently, earlier this month, a pretty big boxing match that Netflix streamed.
Yeah, so a really great example of how sports content is being created and consumed is the recent fight between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. The fight between Paul and Tyson was Netflix's first foray into live streaming an event with such a massive profile. And they had 60 million households tune in to watch a 58-year-old former heavyweight champion who was a heavyweight champion when he was 20, 38 years ago, take on a 27-year-old YouTuber with a subscriber base of 20 million. That doesn't mean anything in the boxing world, or it didn't used to. Yeah. Now it does, apparently.
I think this really speaks to the shift that you're explaining in terms of the relationship between sports content and audiences. We've got two personalities who, on their own, it seems, present an opportunity to bring in new audiences. You know, you've got maybe the old school fans of Mike Tyson who might not otherwise have been that invested in participating in Netflix's live streaming events. And then you've also got this huge audience that Jake Paul brings, which I guess is bigger than boxing and speaks to your point about how streaming and entertainment has really disrupted traditional sports broadcasting.
Yeah, so traditionally audience would have had to pay to watch these types of heavyweight matches. So you would have had to be a serious fan of boxing to fork out $50 and go, I want to watch this fight on a Saturday.
Whereas, like the classic pay-per-view, right? Is that what that is?
Pay-per-view. Yeah. So, but this one was beamed into homes in over 190 countries on Netflix. And because Netflix's reach is so strong, there's no reason for someone who has a subscription to Netflix to not watch the fight.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it wasn't without its problems. There were some buffering issues, some teething tech issues and bugs that I'm sure Netflix will be looking to iron out before their next big streaming events. But that being said, you know, I happened to be at a pub when that fight was happening. The TVs were buffering and frozen. Everyone around me just pulled out their phones and they started watching this fight on 5G on their smartphones because they could. So we've spoken about the storytelling, the docu-series, the Drive to Survives. We've got this fight, this live sporting event example. Is the plan to extend this model across other sporting events? Is this going to be the new norm, seeing sport on Netflix?
Yeah, well, it's not just boxing that's recognised the business opportunity here. And for example, the WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, signed an eye-watering 10-year US $5 billion, that's $7.7 billion Australian, live streaming deal with Netflix in January.
That is a huge amount of money to bring that sport to the platform. So I guess we're talking about two opportunities here. You know, there's the live event market and then there's the behind the scenes doco filmmaking stuff. We've become more accustomed, I guess, to seeing the doco style stuff on the streamers. Do you think that's why we're only just now seeing streaming used for these global live sporting moments? Is it an opportunity that's kind of been leveraged off the back of the doco? Is it a chicken egg situation or?
No, that's spot on. You can't look past the role of resourcing here and the sheer scope of a Netflix-style production arm to make high-quality documentary content. And there's a really clear example of this if we loop back to the Paul and Tyson fight. In the lead up to the fight, Netflix released a 3-part doco-series titled Countdown Paul vs. Tyson, giving viewers a similar kind of Drive to Survive experience of how these two boxers were preparing for the fight, which gave viewers a behind-the-scenes insight into the personalities behind the fight and all the hype, which in turn led to more people tuning in on the day of the fight.
Well, exactly. It's a genius marketing strategy. The timing of that 3-part series, there is a call to action at the end of that. You go, okay, I've watched this series, now I'm emotionally invested, and look at that, in a few weeks' time, I can just watch this fight live on Netflix. I don't need to, sign up to anything. I don't need to pay anything. The relationship speaks for itself. We've got the personalities, George, the struggles, the emotion behind the athletes, behind the sports. It's no longer just about the sport. It's about that human narrative. Any predictions on where this is heading?
I think we're just seeing the beginning. I mean, these platforms are becoming more than broadcasters. They're storytellers, marketing machines, and audience creators. the line between entertainment and sports is kind of blurring.
How does that make you feel as a sports fan? Because for me, as a non-sport person, I find it exciting that there are stories out there that I don't fully have my head around, but that I can connect with. I felt very disconnected from sport, I guess, in lots of instances. But I guess there would be traditionalists who don't like it. There'd be people in the stands at Grand Prix races thinking, I can't believe I'm stuck here with all these people jumping on a bandwagon when I'm a day oneer.
Yeah, it's exciting and it's a little bit scary. I think where it could go wrong is when sports becomes a little bit too much like reality TV, or you start, I think one of the main problems with the Paul Tyson fight was, should those two guys really be fighting? So are there things that are really pure sport, or are they just being done for an audience? It'll
be interesting to see as well, particularly for an Australian audience, how this impacts the accessibility of sport. You know, from a free TV perspective, there are, you know, specific laws, regulations around broadcast deals and rights, audiences, you know, and the arguable right that they have to access sport for free versus, you know, paying a subscription fee to have to watch their favourite sports.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother story.
A whole nother story for a different day. George, thank you so much for joining us today and breaking all of that down for us. We really appreciate it.
An absolute pleasure. Loved it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you learned something, please feel free to pass it on to a friend. Don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you listen, or if you're watching over on our YouTube. We'll be back a little later with this evening's headlines, but until then, have a good one.